Today on the PitchBook podcast, Zac is pitching Mindset by Dr. Carol S. Dweck. And I'm pitching Who Ate the First Oyster by Cody Cassidy. Batter up! All right, Zac, you sent me another text. I looked at the headline. This is what I do. And then I wait for you to tell me about it on the podcast. So you sent me a headline about somebody discovering some ancient or old coins off the coast of Italy. Is that what it was?
The coast of Sardinia. So
Sardinia,
it's a little island just
near
west
there.
of Italy. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, cool. So tell me about it. This sounds like something. I feel like the Pirates of the Caribbean, there's been like 5 movies. Is this similar? Is this what's the story behind this?
So the coins are from 200 to 300 AD, I believe. So after Christ, during the Roman Empire, or excuse me, this might be 200 to 300 years before. Anyway, the coins are really old. They found about 30,000 to 50,000 coins, or they're called phallus. They're little tiny bronze coins, and these scuba divers are just out in the beach with metal detectors looking for stuff. And it's supposed to be one of the biggest finds, at least in the last decade. So there's a little video. You can go to a Popular Science website, download the video, and you see these scuba divers down there with their tanks and their metal detectors, and they find these little tiny coins, but they're in mint condition. They're in great condition. So they're just recovering them. And yeah, so 324 to 340 CE during Constantine. So this would have been after Christ.
Right.
Pretty interesting.
So who the most important thing to me about it is who gets the coins, who owns them,
right?
Do the nerdy guys with the metal detectors get some money? What's the deal?
Well, it doesn't say. But
okay.
but it's when you look up. So I'm like, well, what's the value of one of these coins? And they're worth about $5 per coin.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah, you think it's not like a gold chest,
Yeah.
where 1 ounce is worth, I don't know what, $2,000 or $1,800.
Okay, so is it somebody?
So it's like 200.
Was it a ship?
Grand.
Was it a shipwreck? Was it? Do they know where they
possibly.
came from? Okay,
Yeah,
they don't
possibly.
know.
They think there could be a shipwreck there.
Okay.
There's like this stack of coins in the dirt, so they're recovering them. And I don't know who owns it. Like the scuba diver, obviously the government of Italy knows about it.
Right.
What would you do? You just throw it in your little scuba suit and swim away?
I'm a simple guy. Finders keepers is the rule I go with.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like if you're goofy enough to have a metal detector, you get spoiled, the spoils of your nerdy pursuit, I would say.
I think so. Like, you took the time, you took the risk.
Yeah. You're the one that looks embarrassing with a metal detector.
You're out there hustling.
Yeah.
Unless you're out there as an employee of the government.
There you go. Sure. But if they're only $5 a piece, I mean, this is, yeah. Now, granted, 30,000 times 5 is not a bad deal, but
right.
It's just interesting. I was in Bath, England, and they had found a bunch of coins as well because of the Roman baths, and apparently this is like, I got the sense that maybe I'm misremembering, but that people would go bury their coins, kind of like to hide them from people and then forget about them, or they could relocate them or whatever. And then as the government was digging up and finding these baths, they'd come across these various coin patches as well. So it was kind of interesting. They're on display in the museum there.
It's so fun. I thought about doing a treasure hunt for my kids when me and my wife pass away, and just like when we're gone, there'll be a little
find the will. All right, where's our will?
Yeah, do a little note in the casket, and they're like, "Whoa, what's this in Dad's suit jacket?" And it's like the first puzzle, because for years, for Christmas we've done a treasure hunt around the house. So I'll put little clues, and the kids have to go around the house and figure out, okay, where have I seen this in our house before? It'll be just a little random part of a picture, and the words will be scrabbled to the next room, and they kind of go room to room, and then they find the family prize. So I thought that'd be fun to, but make it meaningful, where all my girls have to work together to go find some
It's
treasure.
a bit macabre, but we'll go with it.
It
All
just
right.
leads them to all my passwords.
Exactly. Can you please stop the PitchBook podcast now and all the social media feeds? Okay. So tell me about Mindset by Dr. Carol S. Dweck. You mentioned this book before, so you mentioned something about it. You remember I remember her name was unique, um, and I'm guessing I have an idea what it's about, but tell me about it.
Well, the book is about this concept, and it's taken off in public schools and private schools, and it really has to do with a mindset of either being fixed or growth.
Mm.
So I'll describe a fixed mindset. Sometimes people will become, they may be naturally talented at something, so they grow up just thinking I'm expert at this, and then once they fail, they are embarrassed because they've only been successful up to that point. And so when they fail, because they have this fixed mindset, they're afraid of failing and they don't want to try anymore. Versus somebody who has a growth mindset, when you fail, that's the first iteration. That's the first attempt. I'm not a failure. And a fixed mindset is I am a failure. So it gets internalized. And they did all kinds of studies with kids in classrooms. They would have two groups. One group, they would praise them. They'd say, "Oh, you're so smart," and make them feel like their intelligence was the most prized thing. But as soon as they felt like they were going to fail at doing the puzzle, they stopped trying because they wanted that praise to be called smart. Where the kids who were in the growth camp, they'd say, "Man, you worked so hard on that puzzle. You made so much progress." And the kids would just keep iterating. They'd keep trying and keep uh, going and keep doing better. So there's this idea of, can your intelligence change, or is your intelligence fixed? So she says, believing that your qualities are carved in stone, the fixed mindset creates an urgency to prove yourself over and over. And you kind of do that until you fail, and then you stop trying. I don't know. Have you ever met anybody like that? Or maybe in your own life, you've had times.
I failed at stand-up comedy, so that was I'm just joking.
You didn't
uh,
you you didn't fail.
no, no, I'm
You're still
joking around.
funny,
I always
Matt.
joke about that, but trying to think. I remember I do remember like when I was in college, there were some talented basketball players I had some classes with because I took the really smart classes like all the athletes. And there was one that was, in my opinion, more talented, but didn't work as hard. And then there was another gentleman who was maybe not as talented and didn't have quite the physical skills. And interestingly enough, neither of them got drafted, but one of them,
Hmm.
the one that worked harder, who to me wasn't as talented. I don't know if this is the same thing, but he did make it to the NBA and kind of played. And I want to say, if you guys are getting curious, I want to say he scored the 10 millionth point in NBA. So he played on a bunch of different teams, and he was a good guy. Anyway, I just one of the things I always remember was the guy who, in my opinion, was more talented would always complain about having to do wind sprints and work out
Mm-hmm.
and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, man, this guy is so talented, but he doesn't work as hard as the other guy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah,
And I
yeah.
don't know if that's a fixed mindset or whatever, but I get the sense that there's a lot of people, especially athletes, I would say, that are told how great they are from the beginning. That maybe when they do come across something difficult, it's maybe harder for them to overcome. That's kind of what I'm picturing you're saying, anyway. I'm
Yeah. Well, they looked at kids that went into middle school, and when they got to middle school, they all had the same grades up to that point. They all did really well in
Mhm.
elementary school. Then they go to middle school, and that's where they started to split, where the growth mindset kids that weren't afraid of failing, they just keep trying, they keep working at it, their grades continue to do well. And the fixed mindset kids felt like, I don't want to fail, I don't want to destroy my record. And so they just kind of gave up or wouldn't try as hard. And if they didn't do well on a test, for example, the first go, on the second test, they would ask them, do you think you'll study harder for the next test? And they would say, no, I'm not good at it. I'm not smart
Mhm.
enough. So why bother? Where the growth mindset is, yeah, I'm going to study a little bit harder. I think I can do a little bit better. And this mindset occurs, as you just pointed, in sports, in business, in relationships, really everything that we do. And when I read this book, it helped me as a parent to say, what kind of mindset am I instilling in my kids? So now instead of like, no, you didn't do that quite right, do it again, or, making them feel like they don't want to fail, it's more about good job. Like you worked so hard. Let's keep going. Let's try it a different way. The other day, my 8-year-old daughter, she was trying to reach something, and I could have easily like just done it for her. I'm a lot taller. She's 9 years old, and I said, "Is there something else?" Oh, it was something that she got stuck on the ceiling. It was like a little sticky thing from Christmas that
Mhm.
she'd thrown up there, and so she got the piano bench and she was standing on it and she was like trying to reach this, and she wasn't even close to reaching the ceiling. But she looked at me like, hey, a little help here. And so instead of just doing it for her, I said, I wonder if you could figure out another way to reach that thing. So she starts looking around and she finds this, I don't know, it was like a broomstick or something, and she's reaching up there with the broomstick. So she figured it out. And I thought, good job. Like you didn't give up there. Those little tiny things where kids want to keep trying until they achieve is the whole point of the book. So there's a couple examples in here. So she says, when you enter a mindset, you enter a new world. In one world, the world of fixed traits, success is about proving you're smart or talented, validating yourself. In the other, the world of changing qualities, it's about stretching yourself to learn something new, developing yourself. And so she goes on to say this leads us back to the idea of potential and to the question of whether tests or experts can tell us what our potential is, what we're capable of, what our future will be. The fixed mindset says yes. You can simply measure the fixed ability right now and project it into the future. Just give the test or ask the expert, no crystal ball needed. And I think the rebel in me just hates that idea that a test dictates your future or your potential. That has just never settled well with me. When I was in, so my birthday is in April. I was younger than all the kids in my class, so I always felt behind from the kid that was maybe born in September, or those special kids born in October.
Uh,
Uh, they just always seemed smarter. But in reality, they were just 6 months ahead of me. They started reading 6 months ahead of me. They started doing things with their parents 6 months ahead of me. So in school, I naturally just felt behind when in reality, it was just a function of my age as being born 6 months later. Malcolm Gladwell talks about that with hockey players. I can't remember which book, but those born in January
yeah,
got the better coaches, they got the better
right. They were
teams, and
bigger. Yep.
they're bigger, they're 6 months ahead. And so the kids, like in these national championship games, everyone was born in January and February, and maybe one athlete was born in August later in the year,
Mhm.
just sheer natural talent. And they're like, why is this occurring? Anyways, I feel like that happens in education. And so for me, I was a bit of a late bloomer where it was like, none of that mindset is reality for me. If I put in the work, if I study, if I keep trying, if I keep going, I can get there. And that's the kind of mindset that you want to build. So I'll just share one last example from the book. And this is a great one because, of course, it has to do with one of my favorite managers, Billy Beane from the Oakland A's. So she says, Billy Beane was a natural. Everyone agreed that he was the next Babe Ruth. But Billy Beane, this is when Billy Beane was playing, lacked one thing, the mindset of a champion. As Michael Lewis tells us in Moneyball, by the time Beane was a sophomore in high school, he was the highest scorer on the basketball team, the quarterback of the football team, the best hitter on the baseball team, batting .500 in one of the toughest leagues in the country. His talent was real enough. But the minute things went wrong, Bean searched for something to break. It wasn't merely that he didn't like to fail, it was as if he didn't know how to fail. As he moved up in baseball from the minor leagues to the majors, things got worse and worse. Each at bat became a nightmare, another opportunity for humiliation, and with every botched at bat, he went to pieces. As one scout said, Billy was of the opinion that he should never make an out. Sound familiar? Did Bean try to fix his problem in constructive ways? No, of course not, because this is the story of a fixed mindset. Natural talent should not need effort. Effort is for the others, the less endowed. Natural talent does not ask for help. It is an admission of weakness. In short, the natural does not analyze his deficiencies and coach or practice them away. The very idea of deficiencies is terrifying. Okay, so you continue on in Billy Bean's story. She says, being so imbued with a fixed mindset, Bean was trapped by his huge talent. Being the player never recovered from the fixed mindset, but being the incredibly successful major league executive did. How did this happen? There was another player who lived and played side by side with Bean in the minors and in the majors, Lenny Dykstra. Dykstra did not have a fraction of Bean's physical endowment or natural ability, but Bean watched him in awe. As Bean later described, he had no concept of failure, and I was the opposite. Bean continues, I started to get a sense of what a baseball player was, and I could see it wasn't me, it was Lenny. As he watched, listened, and molded over, it dawned on Bean that a mindset was more important than talent. And not long after that, as part of the group that pioneered a radically new approach to scouting and managing, he came to believe that scoring runs, the whole point of baseball, was much more about process than about talent. So I thought that was a great example of how Billy Bean kind of grew up with that natural talent, fixed mindset. And as soon as he starts getting to a competitive level where he's going to fail sometimes, that he just crumbled. Versus as a manager, he didn't give up. He found another way around. They ended up winning the World Series, making me a lifetime fan. So so a great story. So um,
Okay,
it's a
so
good reminder.
here's one thing I've always so I my I when I was a kid, if you asked me what I wanted to be, it was professional football player. That's what I wanted to do. My mom would let me play football. So just like everybody who couldn't play football, I went into acting, which makes no sense. I don't know why, but I was in every single play in high school, every single musical, even though I hate musicals. And one of the things that I remember, kind of, I don't remember like didn't have an epiphany, but like kind of like coaching with sports, you have a director that's always up there saying, hey, change how you're doing this, or you're talking too fast, or your accent's off, or whatever it is. And that was really critical to me, because if you listen to that feedback and work on it, you're kind of always iterating, always improving. And I think that helps you. And I guess this kind of goes with mindset as well. Like I probably wasn't the most talented actor in the world, but um, just getting the perspective from someone else was helpful to me. And I think with coaching sports, I think a lot of athletes are used to being coached. And I think there's a lot of people who aren't used to being coached, that maybe didn't have experiences with a director or with athletics or whatever, and they don't take feedback very well. So that's kind of what reminds me of, is like, listen to the feedback and be willing to make adjustments as needed, and kind of be humble, I guess. I don't know if that goes along totally with mindset, but to me, it seems, I don't know, kind of relevant.
Yeah, totally. I think if you have the humility that if your goal really is to become better, you're going to hit ceilings in life, whether it's in your career, relationships, you're going to hit those points of resistance. And if you believe that you can ascend beyond those points, the reality is you have to recognize there's something I need to do different or become better at or iterate and improve to get to that next level. And the growth mindset just allows you to do that, to say no failure is permanent. I'm just learning, I'm growing, I'm gonna make mistakes, and that's just how life is. But that fixed mindset will forever keep you in that, under that ceiling, right?
Mhm.
And so that's why it's such a powerful message. So with
So
our, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it sounds like you already are applying this to your life, especially with your children. Any other ways you're applying it? And then what are you gonna rate this?
Yeah, so I would give the book a home run. She gives so many examples in business CEOs that had fixed mindsets and growth mindsets. So it's pretty well documented. And this idea, like I said earlier, has permeated into schooling and teaching kids. I've even have my kids. Well, a couple times when I've talked about fixed versus growth, they're like, "Oh yeah, Mrs. So and so at school talks about growth mindsets." I'm like, "Good, we're all aligned that kids should just be growing." Um, Personal application. About a year ago, a little over a year ago, there was this exam. Now, one of my colleagues was studying for it, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds kind of interesting. I'll sign up for the test and order the books and do it." What I didn't know at the time is the exam is one of the we'll just say one of the more difficult tests in my industry.
Hmm.
It was like each section
Sure.
was 200 hours of study, and you have 6 months to kind of study for the first level, and that's 6 months to study for the next level. And it was like all about just putting in the time, putting in the work, doing the practice exams, watching the videos, and the content was pretty foreign to me. So it was a lot of things that I hadn't studied or learned before. But I just don't have that belief anymore that I'm not a good student. I just have a belief I have to put in the work. And I think most people are that way. I don't think
Hmm.
there's very few people that are naturally talented at something and they find it and they excel. I think most people have to put in the work and time.
That might be a good point, uh, worth reference or worth saying. Fixed mindset could be that you don't think you're good at something, so you don't want to try, you don't want to fail. I think initially my thought was that you're just talented at something, so you once you do fail, you no longer try it. But it could be there's a lot of people who aren't think they aren't good at stuff and they don't do it because they think they're not good.
Right? Like podcasting,
We're amazing at that.
And
That's all I
Matt,
know. Yeah, it's unbelievable.
I think Baltimore should call you up. I think you'd be good in the
if
NFL.
they if they
Maybe
if
not on
they
the field, but you'd
yeah.
be pretty good
That
at
was my dream. And then
coaching staff.
the irony was my mom didn't want me to get hurt, right? And playing football. And of course, then she lets my younger brother play football, right? That's the classic, older brother, younger brother thing. And then to top it all off, I end up tearing my right Achilles and my left Achilles about 5 years apart playing basketball. Just pickup
Right?
basketball. So yeah, so thanks, mom. Appreciate you. I could have made millions, but instead I'm tearing my Achilles in basketball. Anyway,
Well,
all right.
I mean,
So it
and
is.
maybe just the last point, like Billy Bean's story is so great because in his mind, he's thinking, I'm going to be this great player, the next Babe Ruth. But his path, having a growth mindset, it took him down a different path. He ended up managing,
Yeah.
still being in baseball,
Yeah.
but being a manager,
Yeah.
and being insanely open-minded and questioning things and successful. So with a team with no budget, which has not changed to this day. Any of the Oakland people are listening.
The slight jab there. As the Dodgers just spent 300 lifetimes worth of money on their past. All right. Anyway. All right.
So, all right. So who ate the first oyster?
So who ate the first oyster? This is a book that I have been that's been in my little library thing to borrow, and it's been sitting there for ages, and I'm like, oh, this sounds really interesting. And so it's basically like kind of an anthropology type book of who in theory maybe was the first person to do certain things, right? So I'll just give you an example, right? Who was the first person to like wear pants or wear clothing, right? Who was the first person to paint a masterpiece, to ride a horse? Who's the first person to invent soap? Who created the wheel?
Oh,
Who's
wow.
the first person to tell a joke? The first person to drink beer? The first murder mystery? The first person to invent an invention, discover fire, eat an oyster, shoot an arrow, discover the Americas. Like that's always up for debate, right? First person to perform surgery, and first person to catch smallpox, and the first person to discover Hawaii. Okay, so what's the most interesting out of all those to you? What do
Oh,
you want me to tell you what I remember of it?
Okay, who was the first person to wear pants?
So, of course, I don't remember much about that one. It was something about how for a long time, the humans, and he talks about, the Neolithic type period. So he's talking about different people, like they didn't wear clothing. There's no concept of it. He talks about even in the Andes, I think there were people where it's cold, but they weren't even wearing furs, like they just got used to it, kind of thing. I don't remember a lot about that one, but yeah, basically it's like who invented clothing and why is it important. Um, and it was almost like he actually, I believe on that one, he says that it wasn't necessarily for like warmth as what you think it would be. It was more
Mm.
for, I don't know if power is the right word, but like a symbol of like how great you are. Does that make sense? Like
Oh,
it
okay.
was almost like symbolic of anyway. I remember that one as well. So I'll just,
First person to ride a horse.
yeah, you know how much I love horses. They're
I know.
they're great. Uh, they found some fossilized teeth, horse teeth that had some rubbing on them from a bit, and that was basically the first evidence of someone actually controlling a horse. He talks about how it's probably someone who was a bit crazy, a young man. So he kind of makes up these people, right? Because we don't obviously doesn't
Okay.
know who they actually are, and he
Yeah.
gives them a name. And he'll deduct whether it was a woman or a man, right? So, for example, the oyster one, he thinks it's probably a woman because she was gathering where the men were hunting.
Mm.
There's a super low tide at this time in history. Anyway, so he gives you an idea. Basically, this guy sounds like kind of a daredevil, somebody who lived around horses. They used horses for farming, but they didn't use them or actually food as well, like milk and food, which is disgusting. Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, they said like they probably tried to ride it and then fell off of it. But basically, somebody invented the bit so they could control the horse basically. But even then, it was probably a wild ride, and somebody who was kind of probably a teenager that didn't quite have their frontal cortex fully in place. So they were
Developed
willing to be a little
during the
crazy.
heat.
That's how he describes the person. So he kind of makes up
Yeah.
some of the stuff based on the evidence. It was interesting because he basically says this is the first person to travel faster than on foot, and so he also invented with that bit. It tells them when to stop as well, right? So he basically said the first person that invented speed also invented stopping, or braking. So it's kind of interesting. However, I didn't love it.
Oh,
You think it's super interesting, and you think like, oh, this sounds really cool. Like, who's the first person to shoot an arrow? And he kind of talks about how it was probably like a younger person, and it was like almost like a toy. Like these projectiles were probably toys and things. Anyway, so he makes some assumptions, and I'm not saying it's not based on science. There's a lot of science and stuff in there and anthropology stuff, but it's just kind of like I don't know if I love the trying to personify this random person. I
yeah.
think I prefer maybe just the history. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Hmm.
So he says, so just to give you an example, the first person to discover Hawaii. And again, maybe it's because I do like some of this history and exploration stuff that some of this I kind of already know. So he talks about how great the Polynesians were at basically exploring the Pacific at a time when there were no real tools, and it was almost like passed down from generation to generation. There were like chants of how to direct the ships and things like that. Anyway, so he makes up this guy and he calls him Kirk after Captain Kirk from Star Trek. And he kind of just makes up like, oh, it'd be about this. And again, not makes up. He gives you a time when he thinks this would happen, and then he tells you why he thinks it would happen. But he gives the guy a name and says, "Yeah, Kirk probably arrived at such and such time." So to me, it was just kind of I didn't. I said I just don't know if I love the style of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so the whole time I'm just kind of like, I'm like, who cares? Like, oh, it
Like,
was Billy that discovered the fire, and here's how he just did it. Blah blah blah. So does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
it
Like
just
he's
was.
trying to shoehorn a story into something, a
Yeah.
narrative that's not there.
Well,
May
and
not, probably not there.
it's there, but it's I don't know. It just wasn't that exciting to me. Does that make sense? It was kind of like
Yeah.
when he talks about the wheel, right? Who invented the wheel, right? One of the greatest inventions of all time. He also talks about that being a toy first because toys were much easier to. If you're gonna build a wagon, it's easier to build a model and see how it runs. Because if you mess up the weight of the wheel and the axle and how tight the axle is, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to mess it up. So he basically, postulates that it's probably a toy for a little kid first, kind of thing. So some of that stuff's interesting, but it's
Yeah.
also kind of like, who cares? Does
Because
that make sense?
cavemen, yeah, because the cavemen kids had toys. I mean, that's
Yeah.
all they did. They just played all day.
Like, I don't know, but it was he one of the things that he tries. Okay, so one of the issues with all this stuff is our mind's ability or lack of ability to comprehend large numbers, right? So he's talking about 5,000, 7,000 years ago or whatever, or what the person that invented an invention wasn't even like a Homo sapien, right? It's not even Homo erectus. I don't even know what it was, but it's basically somebody who built a kind of a tool to create another tool, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah,
And all of that's well and good, but the problem is he talks about how difficult it is for our minds to comprehend how long ago, let's say 10,000 years was. So he puts it into time, right? So he says if all the history of humans um, is 24 hours, he'll say, oh, the first person to drink a beer, that was at 12:47 p.m., or sorry, or 11:47, right before midnight, right?
yeah,
So if
right.
midnight's right now, then the first person to drink a beer was
Like
12:47 or whatever.
5 minutes,
And
yeah,
it's
13
like,
minutes
well, that
ago.
doesn't really help me either. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, okay, well, that I didn't love that part. It's anyway, but I will say probably the most interesting thing to me, and I'd never heard this just because I'd never heard this before, was the first person to like make alcohol or make beer is more likely. What basically that he postulates, and this was a theory that came out in the 50s, that the reason that we moved to grain and more of a farming culture as opposed to hunter gatherer is because of beer. So the grain initially wasn't very edible. It was like corn, for example, like little corn. You would chew on it all day and get the amount of calories in one kernel of popcorn. You know what I mean? So which wasn't worth
yeah,
it. But if they ground it up enough or whatever, and I'm kind of mixing things up here, but basically like, and then you had some sort of bacteria in there that would ferment, then you would get an alcoholic drink. But beer was more important because it was based on grains that ultimately turned into bread. So basically, they're saying that beer was more important in us moving from hunter gatherer to what we are now because of the grains not only creating beer and allowing there was basically like a large population that in order to he postulates that because this large population couldn't really move and they had large kind of farming areas, they were prone to be attacked by local neighbors. So
mm-hmm.
he postulates that them sharing beer with them was one way to kind of keep them from being overtaken or whatever. So that part was kind of interesting to me just because I'd never heard it, but a lot of the stuff I'd heard before or just was like it just wasn't all that cool to me to hear about his made up name for a person that supposedly did this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, oh, totally. It is reminding me of a book called Guns, Germs, and Steel. I think we
Uh-huh.
might have talked
Yeah.
about that. You might
Yeah.
like that one because
Yeah.
he talks about like why zebras were never domesticated
Right.
because they have this insane eyesight. Like you just can't you can't catch a zebra.
Yeah.
So when you're
So
talking about riding a horse, I'm thinking, I wonder how many animals were tried out before they settled on the horse. Like, well, let's try an elk or a moose, like the antlers. I'll steer
exactly.
using
Steer via
those.
that's a great idea. Anyway, so I'm gonna give this a single,
Okay.
which
All
maybe
right.
is a harsh, but if it interests you, then maybe you'd like it more. But I just didn't love it, and I was kind of like okay, let's move on. Let's get to the next chapter. Like let's see if this is any better. Um, anyway, that's my opinion.
Is it a
So
pretty dense book or
no, it's
kind of a
pretty
light read?
light. I
Okay.
want to. I mean, I listened to it, and I want to say it was like 6 hours. So it's not super long or anything. That's what about 200-300 pages, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's fine. I just was a little bit underwhelmed by it.
Okay.
So that's my.
It's a cool idea though. I mean, for a book idea.
It's definitely an interesting take. That's what piqued my interest at first, right? And he's got a clever title with "Who Ate Their First Oyster," but
Right.
it's also like, who cares? You know what I mean? Like, does that make sense? I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't know what to say else to say about it.
Any application from the book? Like, are you going to be the first to?
No, not really, because there's not really anything to apply other than, like I said, there was a couple things that were interesting to me, but I guess the only thing you could apply is he has a good hook with his title that made me intrigued by it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny because people always say you can't judge a book by its cover, right? But why do we spend so much time designing cool covers and
Yeah.
logos and all that stuff?
Yeah,
So
it matters. It appeals to that system one in our brain that has emotional response. What do you think? So he kind of talked about going back 10,000 years, but you look at how much progress has been made just in the last 200 years,
mhm.
let's say, and
Yeah,
then going forward 10,000 years from now,
right.
just the compounding of time and the things that we're learning and developing, it's nuts.
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you, but
We'll just follow Jeff
yeah, but
Bezos's
it
clock.
was one of those things, right? And I could have picked a different book. I just thought, you know what? I didn't love this book, and it's not like we have to love every single book on here. That's one of the reasons we rate things, right?
Yeah.
But and it's all up to there's no accounting for taste, so it is what it is. Somebody else might read this and just love it. I just don't know if I care that much about it being the first person. I'd probably be just more interested in the history around that, right? Like I probably would be interested in a whole book that's all about how beer and grain made us a farming society. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well,
Um,
it's neat when they find things in ice,
yeah,
perfectly preserved bodies and animal. I think that's so cool.
yeah, that was the murder. So he talks about the murder mystery was one he talked about it. It was somebody in the mountains of northern Italy that somebody looked like they can deduce that looked up on and snuck up on this guy and shot him kind of underneath the shoulder, and then there happened to be like a snow immediately, so it kind of it froze this guy immediately, so everything was preserved. They found like the arrowhead underneath underneath his shoulder blade, and but his copper axe was still there. So they
Wow.
kind of deduced that like this was somebody that he knew, and was getting revenge because if it was just like a robbery, he would have stolen the axe. But they
Yeah.
figure like this at the village, this axe would have been known. Does that make sense? Like, oh, I know
Yep.
this is Zach's axe. That was hard to say. Zach's axe. So Matt obviously killed Zach. You know what I mean? Because he's
Obviously.
got his axe. So
Yeah.
anyway, just stuff like that was kind of interesting, but I don't know.
All right.
I don't know. Just didn't love it.
Gonna pass on it.
Yeah, it's a single. It's not like a foul ball. It's not terrible. It just was a little not as interesting to me. So
Yeah. Cool.
all right. Well, we appreciate everyone listening. Like and subscribe. Tell your friends all about the PitchBook podcast. How amazing it is. Even though our last book wasn't so great, we're trying to give you shoot straight over here and just tell you what
Yes.
it's. So, all righty, that's it for Zach and I. Have a great